Hey, everybody, and welcome to the Exit Is Now podcast with me, your host, Scott Snider. Welcome back to the show. For those of you that might be following along or maybe even tuning in for the first time, the Exit Is Now podcast, at least in our first year here of the show, is really showcasing the value acceleration methodology and how the methodology comes alive in businesses today. I think that a lot of the time you hear exit planning or exit strategy is something that you do when you're, quote, ready to sell your company. But me as, let's say, a younger entrepreneur, I like bringing it into my everyday business practices and my everyday life to live what I call more value acceleration-centric lifestyles. I have a very special guest with me today who many of you might actually remember from our 2019 summit in San Antonio, Texas. And so Jim, my guest today, is not only just a power session speaker here inside the Exit Planning Institute community, but has a 40-plus year career in education, a Harvard grad. I met Jim at my high school, Snider High School here in Cleveland, Ohio, and Lakewood, Ohio, where he was the president of the high school, and he gave me the honor of allowing me to serve on his president advisory council. So, Jim, welcome to the show, man. I appreciate you coming on.
Oh, thanks, Scott. No, it's great to be with you.
Yeah, it's good. I haven't seen him in like a couple of years.
I was
honestly,
gonna say,
right?
yeah,
Through
COVID
between your moving, moving out of Snider High School into the next kind of phase of your life. Yeah, we haven't really connected in a while, though. We kind of stay in touch between emails and texts. What I like about Jim, and for those of you that are followers of the show, I've been trying to introduce topics and people that have also had an impact on me. And Jim has certainly been a good mentor to me and has an impact and has always been. I remember the first time you interviewed me for the President Advisory Council. We sat down for breakfast. Remember this? We sat down for breakfast and we just had like a very, what I would say, like intellectually stimulating conversation. And so you ask a lot of questions too. So it's like almost the roles could be reversed, but
right.
You've always made an impact. And I think one of the things that Jim spoke about in 2019 at the summit, what Jim, I think's book is on in part, and we'll get to that in the show certainly, is all about servant leadership. Mm-hmm. And I think that certainly as a business leader, as a business owner, as an executive, we hear about leadership all the time.
Yes.
But we don't dive as much into kind of the servant leadership as we want. And that's what I really want to talk to you about today. How do we bring the concepts of servant leadership into our companies, into our leadership styles and roles today? So why don't we just, again, welcome, and why don't we dive into it by what is the definition of servant leadership for you? Where do you go?
Well, I think the quickest definition, Scott, is the sense of how can I influence others in a positive manner, right? So leadership is about leading somebody. So you have to have followers. Why would they follow you? So I think leadership to me, and servant leadership specifically, it's an attitude, it's a belief that I'm here to serve a purpose. I'm here to raise others up. It's all relational, and so from that standpoint, and then I talk in the book about Nelson Mandela had several great points, but one was you have a core principle and everything else is tactics, which is kind of true in a lot of the things we do here. And to me, it was to lead you must serve, and so I think this sense of servant leadership is not only interesting, I think it's actually critical. I think it's critical to companies. I think it's critical to the country. I think it's critical to anybody who's trying to move a group of people in the same direction.
I think that's I totally agree, and we'll dive into how servant leadership goes into business. But you even think about I just wrote down raise others up, serve others. As a business owner myself, that's kind of what you do every day, right? Is you become this mentor or coach to a lot of people as well.
I hope
and you're helping raise, right? Yeah,
right.
You're helping raise your people up to empower them to go do the next thing.
I hope so. And one thing I wanted to get to early was I had an executive coach in Seattle, Chris von Nofsinger, who was a Drucker person, by the way, Claremont McKenna, and he was awesome. But he wrote a small book called "From the Shift from One to Many." And so there's a practical side. I don't do it because I don't think you can do it. You have to be authentic as a leader. So you can't do it as a gimmick. You have to be yourself, and that's why servant leadership matters. If you want a practical example, though, what Chris Mann would say is we all get ahead, we all succeed early in our careers because we outwork, we perform and we get noticed and we get raises and we get all these good feel-good things. But as you become an owner and take over more responsibility, a real good leader, which just comes back to servant leadership, is you are now investing in other people's success, right?
Mm-hmm.
And the reason that makes sense is because 5 people or 10 people or 50 people can accomplish so much more than any individual can accomplish, right? We all get that. The takeaway for me when reading Chris Mann's book was that when you do that, people start saying, well, like, what do you do? You know, because
Right.
everybody else is succeeding and you're celebrating these other people. And the takeaway for me was that if you are ego driven,
Right.
you can't give up that power, right? You can't
Right.
share that power.
Servant leadership is going to be different.
And servant leadership is the sense of it's got to be egoless. It's got to be, I don't really expect anything in return. I'm doing it
Bingo.
for the purpose of doing it to make other people better and leave the place, the school, the business, in a much healthier place than it was before I got here.
I think looking at your career too, which is I think interesting for our audience, right? Though EPI is in this professional education, you've been in education for 40 plus years. Most of our listeners, right, are people advising business owners, the business owners themselves. And although I think we do look at sometimes look at our community as educators, right? We're really business leaders. But can you talk to your career a little bit? Because I think what you just said about servant leadership is a natural play for you, Jim, because you've led that way, at least the entire time I've known you, and likely your 40-year career really serving others in the form of education and bringing schools together.
Well, I think I was fortunate. Just a quick kind of recap of the career was, by the way, I was pre-med for a month, and then I didn't know that. Then I took my first chemistry class and test, and I went, "This isn't going to work." Then I was going to go into business because my brother was. That's how sophisticated I was. But it turns out when I thought about it, I was working at camps. I had a little brother. I was doing some of these things that were very student-kid related, and that seemed to fit me very well. So I started in the arena of education. Then throughout that, I worked at a private school, a little boarding school in Concord, Mass. I went back to Harvard and coached with my coach in football. Went to Fordham University with a guy I admire, Larry Glick. He became the head coach. He brought me down. I became the offensive coordinator. My wife and I had a baby, and then we got out of the business because you can get fired being coaches, although you make a lot more money these days. I went to admissions. I did that at Princeton, and my wife was from Princeton and a fundraiser, so we went down there. And then I always say I was smart enough to realize I wasn't going to become president of Princeton, and I wanted to see if I could lead, and I was really interested in that topic. And so I ended up going to the secondary, spent a year at Walsh Jesuit. Was fortunate to get a job at St. Ed's as principal,
right? Which
I didn't expect to get. I did it just sort of as a lark. A buddy of mine told me about it. We actually went back to Princeton for a couple of years. My wife got a job offer to do a more elevated fundraising. So we did that for a couple of years. And then I went out to Seattle and ran a school for 9 years out there where we actually had to build an entire campus. We had an add a middle school, which were crazy ideas. Yeah. I think sometimes you're naive enough to take those challenges on, because if you actually knew how hard they were, you go, this is crazy. And then I came back to St. Ed's and spent the last 12 years as president, where I'd been principal previously. So that whole arena of trying to learn leadership and how to bring a community along, and on the other hand, by the way, I would point out that St. Ed's is also a very competitive business, in a very competitive environment. So I saw in your room out here that there's a sign that says relentless execution. So that has to be part of what you do. Excellence matters. It matters when you're developing kids. It matters when you run a business.
So I think so let's go to the school thing, because one of the things I think you get a lot when you hear servant leadership, and I was talking to you about this kind of pre-show too. It was always a kind of almost just like a no-brainer, right? It's just like intuitive, the servant leadership stuff for me at St. Ed's, because I think when you hear servant leadership, you get a little bit of a religious undertone, right? It's like the way Jesus led was through being a servant leader. But I think that when we talk about servant leadership today, for those of you that might not be religious, what are some other ways that we can talk to servant leadership, and other ways, the characteristics that build up into servant leadership? Because technically in my research, the coined servant leadership was somewhere in the 1970s by a gentleman named Robert Greenleaf, who had a leadership institute.
Sure, and he's non-sectarian, obviously. Yeah. I think there's when you work at a Catholic school or a Christian school or a Jewish school, you have a foundation there that's a tradition, right? and it does help you frame some of these ideas around servant leadership. But it's not, just them. It's not just ours. And Greenleaf wrote a lot about it, right? So I think as a citizen, I think almost as important as anything as a citizen, how we treat each other, how we lead, how we model for each other. Because I think leadership is modeling. Leadership is authenticity, right? It's really character is important, and how you develop young people and how you work with colleagues and how you influence those people. All those things are critical in any setting. And in fact, I think really as important as anything is how we develop citizens. And there's a word I always liked. I forget where in a speech I heard. It was commonweal, and that as Americans we are all, as Bill Murray said in Stripes, we're all mutts, right?
Right.
We're all part of this unique group of people that came from all different possible backgrounds and continues to. But commonweal meant that we all care about the happiness, the health, and the safety of everyone in our community or our nation. And so no matter what your personal point of view is, we all share a point of view as Americans, as humans, as just hopefully good people. And so from that standpoint, I think servant leadership isn't really necessarily, it's not sort of so philosophical. It's a matter of fact, a very practical approach to how you develop and nurture relationships, and that's the key to everything.
I think you talk about either in the book or in your power session speech at the summit. You talked about it being it's a choice.
Yes,
and that's what you're kind of talking about now. You choose to want to help people to be a better citizen and to do the three things that you just said.
Yeah, I think so often we think of leaders as these people that are up here somewhere, right? I think they're
Almost
literally
like naturally.
I think there's I think I read somewhere that like if you're over 6'2", they're actually more of a chance you can be seen as a leader.
I just missed it at 6'1".
Yeah, right. So I actually qualify.
Yeah, you qualify.
So, but my point is that there aren't requirements to doing this well. There aren't requirements to being a good person. There aren't requirements other than choosing. And one of the things that I think is important, like you don't have to, be a certain size, or you don't have to be elected. You don't have to have any of this stuff. You can choose to serve other people, help other people. The old adage is, the more you give, the more you receive, right? And that's not just play. That's in fact true. The key is to do it in a non-ego-driven way. We all have egos, but to really, why am I doing this? If I'm doing it for the right reasons, if I'm doing it to really raise up other people, then in fact, I'll get the benefits of a better business. I'll get the benefits of better relationships. I'll feel better about life, but I don't do it for that reason. Like if you really do it correctly, there should be no quid pro quo, right?
Right.
It shouldn't be conditional.
Yeah.
So it's hard to explain in a few words, but I think that it's an enveloping kind of approach and an attitude and a belief system about how best to interact with people and make a positive impact.
I think I went on, and for our audience too, you go on the EPI's YouTube channel and check out our power sessions and all kinds of good content out there, including this podcast itself. But if you do a couple of scrolls and you see the power sessions from 2019, you'd see Jim up there. And one of the things that I thought you did well in the session was also talk about examples of what servant leaders look like, or what, and help frame that formal definition. The first one that I give you was you talked about what we hear a ton at weddings, the Corinthians Bible verse, right? And you could read it if you'd like, but I thought you challenged everybody to change the word. I believe it was love to leader. Can you talk about that?
Sure. One of I still think the best book I've read on servant leadership is the world's, I don't want to mess up, the world's greatest leadership principle, How to Become a Servant Leader by James Hunter. And it's actually what he had done. I actually misdid it in my book. He actually didn't change the words. He actually used the words as topics from 1 Corinthians. A lot of people, if you've been to a wedding, it's called the wedding passage from 1 Corinthians. But what I did in the book was I substituted leadership for love. And so this should sound familiar to many of you. Leadership is patient. Leadership is kind. Leadership is not jealous. Leadership is not pompous. Leadership is not inflated. Leadership is not rude, nor does it seek its own interests. Leadership is not quick-tempered. Leadership does not brood over injury. Leadership does not rejoice in wrongdoing, but rejoices with the truth. Leadership bears all things, believes all things, hopes all things, endures all things. I think when we were growing up, or at least when I was growing up, because I'm a little more your dad's generation, we thought leaders were big, strong,
Definitely.
kind of in your face kind of people, right?
Yeah.
And this is a very different approach.
It is. It is. Some might call it maybe a softer approach, but I think it's a more authentic approach. While you were just reading that, I went back to one of your other comments that said this is no gimmick, right? Like you're going to know if that's a gimmick, if you're not really truly living that way. I think it's a hard way to live. I think that's why it's the wedding verse when you're talking about getting married, right?
Yeah, right.
And for those of you that are, it's no gimmick. It's hard. It's fulfilling, but it's a lot of work as well.
Leadership is very difficult because we're all very human.
Correct.
And so we all, we all have faults. We all err, trying to do well. We always have these things in the back of our heads that we have to kind of work through and make sure we're being authentic, right? But when you live in that moment and you are honest and truthful and try to be yourself, I think it's much more relaxed way to live because you're not trying to be a leader. You're just trying to be present and really as much a good listener. I think one of the great words to be successful is the sense of humility. And one of my favorite quotes is from this professor, first African-American professor at Princeton, I forget his name, Lewis, and he gave a whole point on excellence. But he said, only the humble can achieve excellence, since only the humble can learn. So one of the key things I talk about in all this is we're modeling. People aren't listening to us, they're watching us, right?
Yeah.
And if we're fallible, if we're honest, if we don't know everything and we don't tell people, we don't pretend like we know everything, people will appreciate that because that's their experience, right? That nobody knows everything. So you have to have this humility and this sense of a learning culture that you're trying to create, by the way, which helps you solve problems. But that's that authenticity, humility to really develop relationships in a very honest, authentic way, which I think then leads to a much higher probability of a good result.
I think that modeling too, right, makes a lot of sense in your career in education. High school students, college students, even grade school students, we're always modeling, model our teachers, our presidents, our principals. But when you think about it in business too, and I kind of just wrote that note down, it's also in business. I always say when you look through and bleed through the organization and your sales rep or your customer service rep is giving you a hard time or is super difficult or isn't understanding, not empathetic, I guarantee you could go back up that chain of command, if you will, and the owner of that business is very similar in a sense, because I think that it bleeds through the entire organization. I don't think my team at EPI is all like me, but we do share a similar set of core values along the way. So I do think that, yes, I think the modeling thing for us in education is critical with students, but also as the business leader, we're also modeling after each other, really. No
question about it. And the two things came to mind. One is that as the leader, as a servant leader, I really believe that you're a force multiplier. So if you're treating people a certain way and you have these expectations of how you interact and how you value relationships, they're going to then turn around and treat the next person the same way. There's a sad history of abuse where people that are abused turn around and abuse somebody else because that's what they learned, that's what they saw. And the other line is from education is students hear what they see.
It's true.
You can talk all you want, but if you're not congruent, your actions aren't congruent with your words, they're going to see it. So why in the heck wouldn't an adult see it?
Exactly right. Yeah. So I want to give another story of servant leadership, and you tell this good one about the ticket scalper. It's a good story. The Wisconsin, I think it was Wisconsin game or something like that. Well, tell that story. I think that's a good way to think about servant leadership.
It happened a long time ago. It does serve a good purpose because I think a lot of the servant leadership attitude, how you approach it, is this sense of what can I do for somebody who can do nothing for me. You know, you've heard
Right.
that before.
Yeah.
And so my brother was, this is, by the way, this is way back when McGuire was running Marquette and Dean Smith was running Carolina Tar Heels. And so my brother's teaching in Milwaukee. And my dad and I decided to drive up around Christmas time just to sort of check in with Bob and his wife Patrice, and so we go and have a great time. And we get the paper on a Saturday morning, and we go, "Oh, geez, you know, Marquette's playing North Carolina downtown Milwaukee. Isn't that cool? You know, a cold winter day." We go, "That'd be cool. Let's go." So we get in the car, we go down there, and we go up to the ticket person, and the guy looks at us kind of. Wisconsin people are very nice, but he looks at us like we're kind of total idiots. He goes, "You know, this has been sold out for the last 8 months."
Yeah. You're not going to get tickets to this game.
There's just no, and we just went, "Oh man." So kind of dejected, kind of felt foolish. We turned to walk away, and a policeman is standing right there. And he goes, "You want to go to the game?" I go, "Yeah." And he goes, "Well, here's 3 tickets. I just took them off a scalper." And it was just one of those moments where, you know, you're lucky, you feel whatever, but you know, he didn't have to give them to anybody. He didn't have to give them to us. He could have sold them himself. Not that that probably would have been too cool, but you know, he just sort of gave us something, and we had nothing to give him other than thank you.
Right.
And so just that very sort of simple gesture is, again, kind of a really nice little way to frame it. It's just like, how can I help?
Yeah.
You know?
Yeah. And he brought the family together and was able to get you a cool game.
And it was a heck of a
game. Made an impact. I mean, you're still literally talking about it in books and in speeches today. I do. I think it's a simple way to frame servant leadership.
I wish that police officer well, wherever he is. Hopefully he's probably retired by now.
Hopefully he's listening in.
Yeah, he's probably retired by now.
Years ago.
Yeah.
So I want to take a quick break for our listeners. We will be back just in a short couple of minutes, and I want to dive deeper into this servant leadership conversation. We'll be right back.
Walking to Destiny was written to arm business owners and their advisors with the knowledge and understanding needed to recognize their potential, execute growth tactics, and harvest the wealth locked inside a business. Originally written in 2016 by the creator of the Value Acceleration Methodology, Chris Snider, Walking to Destiny 2.0 features a fresh and evolved look into the proven system to maximize value, grow income, and build a business that can be run without you, even if you never plan to leave. Discover how to align your business, personal, and financial goals. Distinguish between your business's attractiveness and readiness to transition. Measure the value of your intangible assets that likely contribute 80% of your company's value. Adopt a process to measure your results every 90 days. Walking to Destiny is the foundation for the Exit Planning Institute's Certified Exit Planning Advisor Credentialing Program. More than 5,000 advisors hold the CEPA designation, the world's leading exit planning credential. Grab your copy of Walking to Destiny 2.0 by visiting www.wtddownloads.com.
Hey everybody, welcome back. If you're just tuning in, we are talking about servant leadership and the role it plays, I think, generally in society and in business as well. And so I want to take the conversation, I would say, even deeper. You talked, Jim, in kind of the first segment of the show about how servant leadership and maybe the effects through generations. You mentioned that, maybe you're more of my dad's generation than mine. Do you think that there's any relevance to younger people being more accepting to the servant leadership style? I mean, you mentioned in the first segment that we were used to, and even my kind of mentors and folks that you read about had a different leadership style. I wouldn't say it was servant leadership necessarily, but I think that you look across EPI's company, the oldest person here is like 43 years old, the youngest maybe 23 years old. And I think that my team is more naturally a servant leadership mindset than maybe others. I don't know if you thought it was generational at all.
Well, I think we transmit the culture, right, from one generation to the next. So a lot of it depends on who you're around and who who are your mentors and who you're gravitate to. So I want to be a little careful about not overgeneralizing.
Sure.
I think the newer generations are more collaborative by nature, don't like to be talked down to. So I didn't, I didn't like that old style of, first of all, I never liked being called my last name. Kubacki, I don't like being called Kubacki. Call me Jim. But so I think a lot of it depends on some circumstances, but I see kids. I mean, I'm very optimistic about the future, by the way, because I see our certainly
Well,
kids
yeah,
at
you get
St.
to see
Ed's
their next generation.
that are just doing remarkable things. But it's this subtlety about influence versus power, right? I think ego and power, which a lot of is caught up in some of the old school ways.
Yep.
It's just, first of all, I just don't think it's as effective, because again, leadership by definition is not good or bad. It's just leadership.
Sure.
And the history of the world is littered with really evil leaders. But
Sure.
it's hard to argue they weren't good leaders because they had people following them. Now, they may have been coerced to follow them.
Right.
And I think if you want to get production and you want people to reach their own potential, to influence them that way, to influence them to sort of want to follow you and want to follow what you're about and what your organization's about, has a much higher potential for people to reach their own potential, especially when you do that whole sense of investing in their success, right?
Yeah.
Because people, when you look at some of the statistics, money matters to some point, but people want to feel valued. They want to feel they have purpose, right? They want to feel there's a reason for them to be at this company. And if you're really trying to focus on that appreciation, that gratitude for people who work with you, then I think you have a higher probability of success. That's just my experience.
Yeah, I was just talking to somebody on the phone last week about hiring, and we were particularly focused in our team at EPI because we're very growth focused as well.
Sure.
And he said, how does your team do what they do so rapidly and at high quality? And you mentioned people want to be valued. I think that if you look at perhaps the next generation in particular, that the first thing they look for in a career is a career that they understand the purpose of their role, right? And they're tied to a larger purpose. They want to be valued for the work that they do. And then next is that they want some level of independence. They want to be able to say, Scott, here's they want to give the general initiative or goal and see that goal through in a way that is right for them and their lives. And it's kind of like that's, I think, one of the reasons you're seeing a lot of conversation today in privately held companies around the 4-day work week versus the 5-day work week. But you also talk about servant leadership. So when we talk about it generationally, I would assume it's a kind of the similar answer. Is servant leadership impacted by gender, age, race, come from? And maybe partnered with that too is that you hear a lot in this old school leadership that there's naturally born leaders. But I think in the way I hear you talk about servant leadership, it's almost like more of a behavior than maybe something you're naturally born with or gifted with, although it could be affected by your upbringing.
Sure. There's a lot in those
There's
questions.
a lot in that. You're going to have to just start unpacking that one.
I think I'm going to show my age and try and remember what you were asking. But, I think race, gender, age. Chris Ma, when he writes in his book, felt that you can be a very powerful, effective servant leader. He didn't necessarily call it servant leader, but real leader, similarly, at a young age, because you had a value base and you had a certain approach. I think so. Age is something that's sort of relative. I think as you get older, maybe you just pick up skill, experience, and training, and you're going to get better when you do all three of those things. So I think that I do think you're influenced by the people around you and the mentors you find. And there's a lot of people talk about finding mentors as an important thing for young people. And if I was a young person, I would encourage you to look for people that can mentor you, that would want to take the time. Because I was talking to my buddies the other day. You said, we're now the people I used to go to. So I was going to these people. Hey, tell me how you got your start. What do you do? I mean, people love to have people take an interest in their careers, right? So find these people. Always ask, tell me how you got to where you got. Sometimes there's bizarre stories, but that sort of sense of mentorship, gender, men and women. I think in my head, there's no reason at all there should be any difference at all, and I think that the world is certainly finally getting there. And same with race. I think those are things that when you really focus on relationships and people, you really value all that they bring to the table. Everybody has a unique set of of values and skills that they're going to bring to the table. And when you recognize that, you'll be pleasantly surprised, I think. But I think overall, I don't want to get too blabbery, but we used to at St. Ed's a little bit where we talk about sort of aspects of do certain aspects of servant leadership help us now, and we went down the path of trying to focus on a sense of cultural humility. So the sense of humility, I think, is probably the most important quality in a leader in many ways. But people always talk about cultural competence, and there are women out in California who worked in the medical industry, and you tell a doctor to be competent, they want to be experts, so they're still not listening to this poor family, whether they're Hispanic or wherever their background is. They're telling them about them because they took a course, and so these women came up with this concept of cultural humility. And so we developed that under James Knight at St. Ed's, and it's really been, I think it's extremely powerful because it's, again, when you're humble, you're always taking the sense of a learner. I'm always learning. I'm not stereotyping. Right. I'm not assuming anything about you. I'm not Jim Kubacki, Polish, Westlake, St. Ignatius as well as St. Ed's. I'm all those things. And so when you don't assume something about people and really take the time to get to know them, you'll be very, very pleased.
So what are some of those other characteristics, right? I think that of the servant leader, we talked about humility. I wrote that down maybe 3 or 4 times in our notes, because I do think it's one of the top characteristics. What are some other?
I think the key to this is that I think you get to choose what you think is going to help you achieve those things and be a servant leader. So in some ways, there's no magical list. When I went through it in the book, by the way, I probably will add one. But when I went through it in the book, I talked about courage, and I was really sensitive about talking about courage because I think it's courage of your convictions. You have to be somebody who stands for something. You have to believe in what you believe. Okay. So you have to have that kind of confidence. Integrity. Are you going to always do what's right and not what's expedient? And so do you have? You have the elements of a good person? Humility, we talked about. Generosity, or is kindness and listening and trying to understand and help appropriately. Empathy is really putting yourself in somebody else's shoes. You can't solve problems without even taking that approach, right? Because you have to understand all the different angles. The one I put out there is competitiveness, because again, you're still not, your job, even as a servant leader, is to get results.
It's true.
And it's a competitive world, and it doesn't have to be a rah-rah, or in your face, win at all costs. It has to be a relentless pursuit of excellence. Yeah. And not settling for anything less. And then the last one, which I think helps round it out a little bit, is a sense of humor, because again, from a relational standpoint, not everything in the world is life or death, and you better be able to laugh at yourself. You better be having joy, fun with your colleagues. And I think sense of humor actually is really important. So those are sort of the character traits that I like. I would probably add perseverance, because I didn't really put that down. Yeah, that wasn't one that I wrote down, but you have to have that stick-to-itiveness.
Yeah, I do. And I like the sense of humor in leadership as well. I think adding that is also unique.
We're all in this together. We're all trying to, again, don't take yourself too seriously. The day you walk out the door, by the way, I hate to tell you, but somebody's going to walk in behind you. So do the best you can while you're there. Feel good about the work you're accomplishing. And then next up,
So we talk a lot about the positives. Let's talk about maybe some of the advantages. I think everybody can kind of see them. What about the disadvantages? What comes to mind?
Yeah, that's a really good point. I think some of the disadvantages is people think when you put the word servant in there, right, that I'm serving other people, people think it's subservient. And it's not. Because you are still a leader faced with all the issues and all the decisions and all that. And some people think it's all kumbaya, and if you yell at, and it's not. Yeah, I think that's probably the thing I would focus on the most when you really have to weigh. Servant leadership is a relational approach to how you interact with people. But the job itself, you still have to find people that want to run with you, that want to do the things you think are important, that want to offer you the ideas and to create that success. And that's where a lot of this kind of some of the vision stuff comes in. But I think that's the one where some people look at it and go, ugh. Even the point I use from Corinthians, right? It replaces love with leadership. They go, oh God, here he goes
here's
again.
another soft thing.
Where in fact, it's not a soft. Leadership is not soft.
It isn't.
You will never have the luxury of being devoid of the responsibility.
Mm-hmm.
And when you take that responsibility, that's critical. When I talk in a book about sort of the big picture, which a CEO has to focus on, right? And there's 6 things I talk about, and there are 3 that are probably universal. The other 3 are a little bit more educational. But the 3 that are universal are always focus on people, always focus on the mission. What's the mission and the culture, which I think are synonymous in my view. And then the third is excellence. And so you can't take your eye off those 3 things because you're still hired to do a job in a competitive world. If kids don't show up at Snider High School on August 25th, we go out of business.
Exactly right.
Right? Or if I don't raise money, if I don't do the things I need to do, if I don't hire people that are affecting the lives of kids in the best way. Now, the point is, I only do it because I want to affect the lives of kids to the best of the ability.
Right.
Getting people to all share in that vision and understand it, and all that. That takes time, and that's, some people don't get it, some people do, and that's okay. But you have to be kind of to your own line out there. You have to be relentless in trying to pursue excellence, because at the end of the day, you want great kids, but you also want them to be armed with all the skills they need to build, to create the world they're going to live in, not just live in the world, right? I need leaders who can create the next 50 years around here.
Exactly.
And so from that standpoint, it's never never going to be easy.
I think it relates a ton to us in business too, because we talk a lot about decentralizing the business owner.
Yeah.
We talk a lot about empowering people, and I think that when you look at people, mission, and this pursuit of excellence, I think it's directly for the owners listening. If you're in that age group or that phase of life where you're looking to more immediately harvest the value of your company, these are the type of things that I think at least add value to an overall company and organization. We talk about taking it from a very successful year-over-year organization to a very significant one. And I think that in part, you and the people at the high school that I attended, that you were in charge of, produce great people coming out of there. And it makes it a very, I think, talk about mission-driven values. But nonetheless, I think that people, mission, excellence, this pursuit of excellence is critical really in any organization and in any people.
No question in my mind, why bother, right?
Yeah, right.
If you're not going to be good at what you
simply.
do.
Well, this is why I think it's so different for the next generation of leaders, because I think it's that comment right there, Jim, is like, to me, I'm sitting here listening and thinking about servant leadership, and again, maybe it's my bias in growing up in the culture, isn't that how you should lead?
Oh, I think so.
Right? Isn't that the leader that most people want?
I think the only hedge I would give in those 3 would be your number one job, because I think the only way I can honestly say I changed St. Edward High School.
Yeah.
Right? I think we did a lot of great work. Lot of people did a lot of great work and continue to. But the only way I can honestly say I changed the institution was by who I brought on board. So getting the right people
that also believed in that framework,
that also have the values you share, and then have that desire for excellence. I used to think, I can just say, hey, here's where we're going, figure out how to get there. Well, some people do that really well. Some people don't. They need more of a little bit more guidance. So I think that's where maybe the experience over years came in to sort of say, you just can't throw people out there and say, here's what we do, go figure it out. Until you really had enough experience with them to know how they interact, how they work, how they learn, and that. So that's the only hedge there from that sort of a standpoint of saying, is it easy or hard? You got to always be trying to, every time you have a chance to hire somebody, no matter how good the person leaving is, you have a chance to get better.
Right. I totally agree.
No question about it. And so,
well, to your point, it's just the thing that we talk about, this relentless pursuit of execution,
right,
or excellence. Like even in our core values today too, we have purposeful growth. So once you're here, we're always evolving, we're always growing, we're always challenging that kind of status quo, if you will, along the way.
Well, from we talk about sort of as we will a little bit about how the book's broken out. When you start talking about vision. I think vision is constantly, I always think of in my head, it's this constantly, my job is to peek over the horizon and try to figure out where it's going, right? I want to get there first. So if our school or our company or our whatever can figure out where it's going and can get there first, now again, our kids will be that much better prepared to meet the challenges that will come with that time. I saw a guy, a professor, Northwestern professor, talk about technological singularities, which I had no idea what that meant. But it's sort of like, hey, in certain times of history, huge events happen. So the biggest one is the Industrial Revolution, right? After that, all bets were off because that changed everything from agrarian to industrial society. He said a lot of people think the computer age has been a technological singularity. He says, I don't think so.
Really?
As disruptive as that was, he goes, I don't think so. He said, AI, he goes, by 2035, computers will be smarter than us. So if I have a student at St. Edward High School, he's going to be in the prime earnings time of his career in 2035. How am I preparing him to win or to succeed in that environment that we don't even know what it looks like yet? So it's that constant thirst for trying to figure out where it's going that I think is how vision is created, which is also part of your job as the head or the head.
I always liked that. I remember that you said that a bunch of times. I wrote it down again because I want to keep it. I want to keep it on the desk, right? As the leader, you're kind of trying to just take a peek over the horizon to kind of see. That's, I think, even more important than your role as an educator or leading an institution like that. But I want to take a quick break. When we come back, I want to talk specifically about the book that Jim wrote and is out in the market today. So we'll see you just back in a quick minute or two.
Get ready to uncover innovative solutions, build deeper relationships, and share transformational experiences at the Exit Planning Summit this May in Scottsdale, Arizona. This summit is the world's largest exit planning-centric event, bringing together professional advisors and their teams from around the globe. It is the premier conference for people committed to working with business owners, accelerating business value, aligning personal and financial strategies for the business owners, and collaborating with the top professionals in the market today. The transformative experience does not stop when the sessions end. Immerse yourself in a distinctive lifestyle experience that transcends expectation. Join us at the magnificent Five Diamond Resort, the Phoenician, the premier luxury hotel in Scottsdale. Immerse yourself in breathtaking views, impeccable service, and unparalleled amenities. Curate a distinctive resort experience infused with a retreat-like ambiance that transforms your well-being. Learn more and reserve your spot now at www.exitplanningsummit.com.
Hey, everybody. Welcome back to the Exit is Now podcast. So we talked about servant leadership, and you could showcase it a bit in Jim's book, which is Choose to Lead. I think written, again, from it says a practical guide for educational leadership. But in knowing Jim and reading the book and listening to his speeches as a business owner, as a business leader, and then maybe an educator, I guess, in part, I think there's things that we can take out of this book as business leaders to take into our daily jives. But before we kind of dive into, I want to talk about the 4 sections, if you will,
Sure.
of the book, because I really think it positions leadership. But as somebody that is working on a book now with my dad, the 2nd edition of Walking to Destiny, I know how it goes. So, what was the inspiration for what you're doing now in the Choose to Lead book?
Well, I think after 40 years or so in the business, different aspects of education, but all in education, you want to give something back. Is there anything I can add to the conversation? And I started taking notes, 10 years ago, and scribble notes on vacation and just goof around. And I kept having this conversation in my head, because I'm a guy who has a lot of ideas and doesn't follow through a lot. And so I finally said, listen, darn it. Put up or shut up,
Yeah.
So I literally, buddy of mine, we always have Thanksgiving together. They have a place on this Whidbey Island off the coast of, Seattle.
Yeah.
I said, can I borrow the place for, they had a little cottage down by the water as part of this. And they said, yeah. So I literally, my son picked me up. He lives out there, got some food, dropped me off. And I could literally concentrate for 2 weeks straight, just focus from 8 till midnight,
Cool.
And so I got stuff written. I think I did 135, 140 pages. Nothing like what this is.
Yeah.
But it just gave me something to play with. And then I put it away for several months, rewrote it, got a wonderful editor out of LA. She did a nice job on it. gave it back to me. I put it away again, rewrote it again, rewrote it a little bit more, gave it back to her, and then went through that rigorous spell check thing that we all do. And a friend of mine did the layout, Jeannie, in Boston. So it really was I thought, a cool experience. I mean, I hope I can continue to keep writing. So I was proud that I did what I had hoped to do for 20 years. But I actually liked the process of writing. And then, as you mentioned, the four sections kind of fell out.
After
a while, yeah. So,
and what's the end goal, right? So now you're a business owner now, right? Like a
right,
consulting company to help younger generation presidents of schools. Lead.
Sure. My wife and I, Amy, has a long career in fundraising, right? She's worked at places like Harvard, Princeton, Cleveland Clinic, Denison.
It's a very smart family. Fordham, Harvard,
she is good at what she does. Anyhow, we always liked working together, and so we have an LLC called Choose to Lead with number 2 lead. And my end is probably I would like to, if I can take an aspiring head of school or a new head of school and try and help flatten the curve for them a little bit by working with them and coaching them, that would be fun for me. Again, if I can be useful, then I think it's important to try to be useful. I did one search for another school last year. I didn't think I'd like that. I actually did. And we're talking to some different people about some work we might end up doing together. So we haven't run out because I just retired June 30th, technically.
Yeah, right.
So I'm trying to.
You're not running out.
You're
a new grandfather too.
Yes, Jack. Yeah. June 30th. The little man is now 10 months old, which is a treat. So we're gonna do what we think we can handle while still trying to back off a little bit.
I would challenge you too to when you and your wife kind of round it all out and go back and get back into the market, that you could probably do stuff in the business world too. I think even with our next gen of leaders.
Well, I appreciate that. You mentioned that the principles are really about leadership, not necessarily educational leadership. The examples are about educational leadership, right? Sure. Because that's my realm. So I appreciate that, Scott. And I would like to do that. I did a little piece for Eaton end of last summer.
Yeah.
With a leadership group, one of our trustees, and that was fun. So I would like to pursue anything. If anybody's interested, let me know.
Yeah, I would say that. Chat. Well, I'd like to kind of close on the kind of the 4 areas that you concentrate in the book, because again, when I read it, I was like, oh, this is kind of where I'd like my team to be. You talk about leadership in 4 ways: personal leadership, organizational leadership, visionary leadership, and operational leadership. Can you just kind of talk to those?
Sure. The 4 pieces. I mean, personal, you got to figure out what you think a good leader looks like, and try to figure out what that is for you. And to me, when we did that exercise you mentioned back away with our kids, we'd ask them the qualities of a leader they admire, and they came out as either a character trait or a skill. And you can work on both. So getting your own sense of personal, how are you going to be as a leader? What are the qualities that will make you authentic? And what do you want to work on, by the way, too? It's not like you're not fully formed.
Right, exactly.
I'm still not fully, I'll never be fully formed. The organizational is like, you got to be big picture once you become more of a CEO type. And so the 6 things in my one were the 3 I mentioned: people, mission, culture, and excellence. And then in my world, it was in the educational world. The next 3 were the revenue streams, which are fundraising and missions. You have to be the public face of the community again, and be developing those kinds of relationships. And the 3rd escapes me. Sorry. And then the visionary again is I've been fortunate in my life that people say I'm visionary, and I think that just is a lot of learning, a lot of constant being a learner and trying to connect dots.
What's the peak over the horizon?
Peak over the horizon, and then the execution of vision is developing strategic plans and working plans that are really strategic oriented, and that's been fun for me. And then the last one, again, whatever your industry is, mine, there's probably 6 or 7 aspects of running a school that it's the nuts and bolts of running a school. You better know what it takes to run a school. You can't be up here in the clouds always thinking great thoughts. You got to run the place. So those 4 together, I think you have to be working on them at all times. I think by the way, I think it's fun to work on all 4 at the same time.
It's going to be
and really
interesting
develop.
too, coming through like a 40-year career like that too, or even I guess less than that. You said 12 years at St. Ed's,
Right?
And even before that, you were head
And
of school,
9
right? At
at
9
Eastside
there,
Catholic.
taking these, like as you said, in administration. Like I'm just trying to think through the roadmap, or right, the come from somebody now that is a head of school, and putting all of these four now together,
Right.
And running, as we talked about, kind of off here during our breaks, you're basically running a business. Right?
No,
it's a pretty damn big business,
very
too,
competitive business,
right? Yeah.
And obviously, I think a very important business. But no, I think when push comes to shove, this last 10 years has probably been my most enjoyable of all. Partly, I think I was a little seasoned, right? I knew something I didn't know before, but I think it was because I really took the time and mostly got the right people in place. You never always have everybody in place, so there were times, a lot of the last 10 years, where I really felt like I had the right team. And man, when everybody's kind of cranking at the same, everybody's kind of
I totally know
going, it's just a wonderful, wonderful experience. Then you start throwing in, a board where we had wonderful people on the board, really thoughtful, smart, very generous people. You got a lot of constituencies in the school because you got kids and parents and alumni and friends but 99% of my experience was meeting really great people.
Yeah.
And that's its own reward. Everybody deals with the 2 or 3 or whatever percent that's going to drive you crazy. Yeah, sure. But I've been very fortunate in my career to work at some great places, to have some great challenges, but also to mostly be able to try to assemble the right team that really wants to get after it and get things done. Because again, who's going to win? The students are going to win.
Yeah, really, yeah, absolutely. Right. Well, Jim, I appreciate you coming in, taking some time to talk leadership, servant leadership. My
pleasure. Thanks, Scott.
I would encourage everybody to check out Jim's book, look at his session over on our YouTube channel. But nonetheless, we will be back. We will be back in a couple weeks. You can listen to all of our podcasts on all of your podcast stations. They always laugh at me behind the glass, the Spotifys, the Apples, and I can see them looking at me right now. All the good places that you get your podcasts. So with that, everybody, thank you, and we'll be back soon. Thanks.